The dawn of 2026 has brought the international community to a precipice that many diplomats and arms control experts have feared for decades. On February 5, 2026, the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, known as New START, is set to expire, marking the end of the final remaining legal framework governing the nuclear arsenals of the United States and the Russian Federation. For over 50 years, beginning with the SALT negotiations of the Cold War era, Washington and Moscow have operated under a succession of bilateral agreements designed to provide transparency, predictability, and physical limits on the world's most destructive weapons. However, as the clock ticks toward the midnight hour, the absence of a successor agreement or a formal extension has triggered alarms across global capitals. The New START Treaty specifically limits both nations to 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear warheads and 700 deployed heavy bombers and missiles. It also provides for intrusive on-site inspections and regular data exchanges that allowed each side to verify the other's compliance. While Russia officially suspended its participation in the treaty's inspection regime in 2023, citing the geopolitical environment and the conflict in Ukraine, the treaty's quantitative limits remained a vital baseline for global stability. Without these limits, the two nuclear superpowers will, for the first time since 1972, be legally unconstrained in their ability to expand their strategic forces. International articles highlight that this expiration is not merely a bureaucratic lapse, but a fundamental shift in the global security architecture. The Trump administration and the Putin government have engaged in a series of high-stakes communications, yet the path forward remains obscured by deep-seated mutual distrust and the complexities of modern warfare. As the deadline nears, the prospect of a world without nuclear guardrails is no longer a theoretical exercise, but a looming reality. The international community watches with bated breath, recognizing that the collapse of New START could signal the start of an era defined by opacity and unbridled military competition. The geopolitical stakes are magnified by the fact that modern delivery systems are faster and more precise than those of the previous century, making the lack of transparency even more dangerous for global command and control systems and increasing the risk of miscalculation during periods of heightened international tension. In the months leading up to the 2026 deadline, the Kremlin initiated a series of diplomatic maneuvers aimed at shaping the post-New START landscape. In late 2025, President Vladimir Putin publicly proposed a one-year gentleman's agreement to maintain the existing warhead limits without a formal treaty ratification process. This proposal was framed by Moscow as a pragmatic stopgap to prevent an immediate breakout into a quantitative arms race, while the two nations attempted to negotiate a more comprehensive successor. From the Russian perspective, maintaining the status quo provides a level of strategic stability while they continue to modernize their non-strategic nuclear systems and hypersonic delivery vehicles. In Washington, the proposal was met with a mixture of interest and intense skepticism. President Donald Trump, returning to the White House with a mandate to prioritize American interests and better deals, acknowledged the Russian offer as a good idea, but stopped short of a formal commitment. The American dilemma is multifaceted. The U.S. military establishment is concerned that a simple extension of current limits may favor Russia, which has invested heavily in novel nuclear technologies not fully covered by the original New START framework. Furthermore, the U.S. political landscape is divided on whether to engage in bilateral talks with Moscow, while the conflict in Ukraine remains unresolved and Russian rhetoric continues to include nuclear signaling. International reports suggest that the U.S. State Department and the Pentagon are weighing the risks of a no-limit environment against the risks of a deal that might be perceived as weak or insufficient. The Trump administration has also signaled that any long-term agreement must eventually account for the rise of China as a major nuclear power, a requirement that Russia has historically resisted, arguing that French and British forces must also be included in such multilateral frameworks. This deadlock has created a diplomatic vacuum. While both leaders have expressed a desire to avoid a ruinous and expensive arms race, the lack of a formal negotiating channel has left the world wondering if a verbal agreement between two leaders will be sufficient to replace a rigorous, verified treaty. The uncertainty has rattled NATO allies, who rely on the American nuclear umbrella and the predictability provided by U.S.-Russian arms control for their own defense, planning, and national security. The impending expiration of New START is occurring in a global context far more complex than the bilateral world of the Cold War. The most significant shift is the rapid expansion of China's nuclear arsenal, which the Pentagon estimates could reach 1,500 warheads by 2035. This third-player problem has fundamentally altered the calculus for American policymakers. For decades, arms control was a two-way street between Washington and Moscow, but the United States now faces the prospect of deterring two near-peer nuclear adversaries simultaneously. International analysts point out that if New START expires, the U.S. may feel compelled to increase its deployed warheads to ensure it can cover targets in both Russia and China. This, in turn, could lead Moscow to increase its own numbers to maintain parity with the U.S., creating a recursive loop of expansion. The concept of uploading, adding extra warheads to existing Minuteman III or Trident II missiles, is frequently discussed in defense circles as a rapid way for the U.S. to bolster its forces if the treaty limits vanish. Russia possesses similar upload capabilities with its Sarmat and Yars missile systems. Beyond the three major powers, the collapse of the U.S.-Russia framework threatens the broader Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT) regime. Non-nuclear weapon states have long argued that their commitment to not develop nuclear arms is contingent on the major powers making good faith efforts toward disarmament, as mandated by Article 6 of the NPT. If the two largest nuclear powers abandon the last of their restrictions, it may embolden other nations to seek their own nuclear deterrence, leading to a cascade of proliferation across the Middle East and Asia. Financial costs also loom large. A new arms race would require hundreds of billions of dollars in additional spending at a time when the U.S. is facing significant domestic budget constraints and a high national debt. Reports from international financial centers suggest that the economic burden of a renewed nuclear buildup would divert resources from emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and cyber defense, which are increasingly seen as the primary domains of 21st century conflict. The lack of a clear path toward a trilateral agreement involving Beijing makes the expiration of New START a potential catalyst for a three-way race that no nation is truly prepared to fund or win. A primary reason that negotiating a successor to New START has proven so difficult is the emergence of technologies that did not exist or were not mature when the original treaty was signed in 2010. Hypersonic glide vehicles, which travel at more than 5 times the speed of sound and can maneuver in flight, pose a unique challenge to existing missile defense systems and traditional arms control definitions. Russia has already deployed the avant-garde hypersonic vehicle, and the United States is racing to catch up with its own programs. Furthermore, the integration of artificial intelligence into nuclear command, control, and communications (NC3) systems has introduced new risks of automated escalation. International articles have highlighted that without the formal communication channels and data exchanges mandated by New START, the risk of an AI-driven or cyber-induced false alarm leading to a nuclear launch is significantly higher. Verification, the bedrock of any arms control agreement, has also become more difficult. The suspension of on-site inspections means that both sides must rely on national technical means, primarily satellites, to monitor each other's activities. While satellite imagery is more advanced than ever, it cannot look inside a missile silo to count how many warheads are mounted on a single booster. This warhead counting was a central feature of New START inspections that is now lost. The rise of dual-capable systems, missiles that can carry either conventional or nuclear payloads, further complicates the picture. Without a treaty to define which systems are nuclear accountable, a conventional strike could be misidentified as the start of a nuclear salvo, leading to accidental Armageddon. Experts interviewed in international journals emphasize that the transparency gap created by the treaty's end will lead to worst-case scenario planning in both the Pentagon and the Kremlin. When you cannot see what your adversary is doing, you must assume they're doing the maximum possible, which necessitates a maximum response from your own side. This logic was the engine of the original Cold War arms race, and it appears to be returning with a vengeance in 2026. The loss of human-to-human contact between inspection teams also removes a critical de-escalation tool, as these interactions often provided a reality check against the more aggressive interpretations of intelligence data. As the final hours of a New START treaty approach, the global community is forced to confront the reality of a world without nuclear restraint. The psychological and political impact of this shift cannot be overstated. For the past 15 years, the treaty served as a symbol that, despite profound disagreements on human rights, territorial integrity, and regional influence, the United States and Russia shared a foundational interest in avoiding nuclear war. The end of this era signals a breakdown in the most basic level of functional cooperation between the world's two largest nuclear powers. International observers note that the expiration will likely lead to increased nuclear signaling and brinkmanship in regional conflicts. Without the red lines provided by treaty limits, nuclear weapons may be seen less as tools of ultimate deterrence and more as flexible instruments of coercive diplomacy. This is particularly concerning in the context of a war in Ukraine and tensions in the South China Sea. Furthermore, the expiration of New START places immense pressure on the upcoming 2026 NPT review conference, where non-nuclear states are expected to voice their outrage at the perceived abandonment of disarmament obligations. The risk of a new nuclear age is that it will be characterized by a lack of the hotlines and crisis management protocols that were painfully developed after the Cuban Missile Crisis. If a new arms race begins in 2026, it will be faster, more technologically complex, and involve more actors than the first. The Reuters report and other international dispatches conclude that while a last-minute deal is still technically possible, the political will require to achieve it is currently absent. The most likely outcome is a period of deep strategic uncertainty, where the only thing limiting the production of nuclear weapons is the reach of national treasuries and the capacity of industrial bases. As the world moves past the February 5th deadline, the primary goal of international diplomacy must shift from preventing the expiration to managing the fallout and attempting to build a new, albeit fragile, informal framework for survival. The lessons of history suggest that once the race begins, it is incredibly difficult to stop until both sides reach the point of exhaustion or face a near-catastrophic event that forces them back to the negotiating table. The year 2026 stands as a historic pivot point, marking either the end of the age of arms control or the beginning of a much more dangerous chapter in human history.